I need to mention right at the top that this deep dive is part of the podcast, Odomos Idike tu Historia, by Giannis Stefanidis.
Right, exactly.
So I want you to put yourself in a very specific and, frankly, pretty overwhelming position for a minute.
Oh, it's an incredibly overwhelming scenario.
Yeah. Just imagine you are handed a blank piece of paper, and you are told that you have to completely redesign an entire major European metropolis.
But we weren't talking about, just tweaking a few intersections.
No, not like adding a bike lane or changing a park. I mean, redrawing the map entirely from scratch. Because the city you were standing in has literally just been reduced to, I think it was 120 hectares of smoldering white ash.
That's right. Just complete, absolute devastation.
And you are tasked with shaping the modern destiny of this city and the hundreds of thousands of people who will live there for the next century.
It's a godlike level of responsibility, really.
It is. So, you get to work. You design these sweeping boulevards. You engineer monumental squares that open up to these breathtaking vistas of the sea.
You basically fundamentally alter the social fabric of the city.
Exactly. And you do such an incredibly thorough job that decades later, the city decides to honor your monumental, world-changing contribution. They decide to name a street after you.
Which is, the standard architectural honor.
Right. And here's the kicker. The street they name after you is a fake 50-meter dead-end private alleyway.
A completely phantom street.
Yeah. An alley that legally does not even exist.
I always say it's the ultimate revenge of the organic city.
Oh, for sure.
You spend your absolute prime as a visionary trying to impose strict rational geometry on human chaos. And human chaos responds by trapping your legacy in this bureaucratic joke between two private buildings.
It is equal parts tragic and hilarious. And that is exactly what we're exploring today.
It's a fascinating story.
We are going deep into the profound, contradictory, and honestly entirely bizarre legacy of the French architect Ernest Hébrard in the city of Thessaloniki.
Because to understand his work, you really have to understand what he was replacing.
Right. We are going to start by looking at how a single, incredibly mundane spark in a basement in 1917 just completely erased a centuries-old urban labyrinth.
The catalyst for everything.
Yeah. But more importantly, we are going to look at the mechanics of what happened next. How Hébrard's grand architectural blueprints didn't just build new roads, but actively re-engineered the social geography of Thessaloniki.
And displaced a lot of people in the process.
Exactly. We are going to explore the ridiculous cartographic history of his phantom street. And we'll see how the exact same forces of displacement from a century ago are playing out right now in that very same neighborhood, fueled by modern algorithms and short-term rentals.
Because when you really strip it all down, this isn't just a conversation about architecture.
Oh, not at all.
It's a conversation about who is actually allowed to exist in a modernizing city. Like when you draw a line on a map, you are making a decision about who gets pushed out, who gets invited in, and how the physical space of a city constantly wrestles with the people who actually live in it.
That is so true. So let's set the stage. Because to comprehend the sheer magnitude of the blank canvas Ernest Hébrard was handed, you first have to understand the unbelievably dense, complicated world that was wiped away.
You really have to put yourself in Thessaloniki in the years just before August 1917.
Yeah, because this was not, it wasn't a neat, grid-like European capital.
Not even slightly. We are looking at a booming, multi-ethnic metropolis.
I have the numbers here. In 1913, the population was hovering right around 158,000 people.
And the demographic breakdown of those 158,000 is absolutely fascinating.
It really is. You had about 60,000 Jewish residents.
Who had been this dominant cultural and economic force in the city since the late 15th century.
Right. And alongside them, you had 45,000 Muslims and 40,000 Christians. And they were all just packed into this incredibly dense medieval footprint.
And what's crucial to understand about the daily reality of those residents is that they weren't living in strictly segregated, sanitized bubbles.
Right, they were all mixed together.
The historic center of Thessaloniki was this incredibly tight tapestry. It was characterized by what urban historians often refer to as the Eastern visage.
The Eastern visage. Paint a picture of that for us.
Yes.
What did that actually look like on the ground?
Well, you had these narrow, winding, unpaved streets that followed the natural topography. There wasn't any sort of master plan.
So very organic growth.
Completely organic. You had wooden houses with traditional projecting balconies. They were called the saknisi.
Just like easy, right?
Yeah. And these balconies would lean out so far over the narrow alleys that they almost touched the buildings across the street.
Oh, wow. So it's almost like a canopy over the street.
Exactly. And underneath those overhanging balconies, you had a really high degree of mixed housing. Wealthy merchants, working-class laborers, people of different religious groups, all living in extreme proximity.
It sounds like a really vibrant sensory overload of a city. But, I mean, architecturally speaking, it sounds like a massive tinderbox.
Oh, it was a disaster waiting to happen.
You have a dense concentration of timber structures, narrow alleys that essentially act like wind tunnels,
Yeah.
and basically zero modern fire infrastructure.
None whatsoever. Which brings us to the spark.
Right. August 5th, 1917. Or August 18th, if you're looking at the Gregorian calendar.
Right at a humble, traditional wooden house located at Olympiados 3.
When you dig into the archival testimonies about this, the sheer mundanity of how this catastrophe starts is just terrifying.
It really is. It begins with frying eggplants.
Frying eggplants, I mean, you can't make that up.
No, you can't. It's high summer in Greece. 2 women are in the house, engaged in this completely routine domestic task of cooking over an open fire.
Right.
And somehow, a stray spark from that cooking fire escapes. It catches, and it transfers down into a basement.
And we should clarify, basements in this part of the city were not, empty concrete cellars like we have today.
No, not at all. They were storage areas packed with highly flammable materials. We're talking straw, winter fuel, old timber.
So it's literally kindling.
Exactly. The spark hits that fuel, and within minutes, the situation is completely out of control.
And it's not just the house that's the problem, right? The environmental conditions on that specific day were basically a worst-case scenario.
You have the Vardaris wind.
Yeah, if you've ever been to the region, you know the Vardaris. It is this fierce, dry, northwestern wind that just sweeps down the Axios River Valley and blasts through the city.
And that wind catches the flames at Olympiados 3 and essentially weaponizes them.
It just acts like a bellows.
It blows a literal wall of fire directly southeast, straight down into the most densely populated historic heart of the commercial center.
And to make matters worse, we really have to look at the geopolitical context of 1917, because the world is at war.
Right, World War I is raging.
Thessaloniki is not functioning as a normal peacetime city at this point. It is the headquarters of the Allied Army of the Orient.
There are hundreds of thousands of British, French, and Serbian troops encamped in and all around the city.
And that military presence has just completely overwhelmed the local infrastructure.
The water reserves were severely depleted. They are being diverted to supply these massive military camps.
Right.
So when the fire breaks out, there is virtually no water pressure to fight it.
And from what I read, the attempts to stop it actually made it worse.
Oh, it was a comedy of errors, if it wasn't so tragic.
The historical records detail how the Allied soldiers, trying to help, decided to use military explosives.
Yeah, they tried to dynamite buildings in the path of the fire.
To create fire breaks, right? Which is a common tactic to starve a fire of fuel.
It is, but the streets were so narrow and the buildings were so interconnected.
So blowing up a house just threw burning timber and debris onto all the surrounding roofs.
Exactly. They were essentially just creating new focal points for the inferno to spread.
It was an absolute cataclysm. The fire raged uninterrupted for 32 hours.
32 hours of just pure destruction.
And when the smoke finally cleared, the physical and cultural landscape of the city was completely unrecognizable.
It burned 120 hectares. We are talking about 9,500 buildings completely reduced to ash.
The cultural loss alone is just staggering.
Yeah.
Entire archives that held the commercial and civic history of the region were vaporized.
Synagogues were destroyed. We lost 11 mosques, including the famous Sayatli Mosque that stood right next to the government building.
The entire eastern visage of the city's centuries of Ottoman and Byzantine organic growth was erased in a day and a half.
And the human toll was even more devastating. 70,000 people.
That's nearly half the city's population.
Half the population left completely homeless overnight. They were forced into makeshift tent cities on the outskirts.
And because the fire swept directly through the central commercial and residential districts, the demographics of the homeless were very specific.
Yes. 3/4 of those 70,000 homeless were from the city's Jewish community.
I mean, try to wrap your head around that. You go to sleep in a bustling ancient metropolis, and 2 days later, you are standing on a hill looking down at a skeletal landscape of smoking chimneys.
And 70,000 of your neighbors are suddenly refugees in their own hometown.
The scale of the crisis is paralyzing. If you are looking at a city completely leveled, how do you even begin to process that?
It's almost impossible to fathom.
And yet, the Greek government, led by Prime Minister Eleftherios Venizelos, looks at this smoking ruin and makes a massive, highly controversial decision.
They immediately ban all rebuilding.
Right. They tell the citizens no one is allowed to rebuild their home.
Because where the residents saw a horrific tragedy, the state saw an unprecedented, once-in-a-century opportunity.
They saw a blank canvas.
Exactly. For decades, urban reformers have been complaining about the chaotic, unsanitary, and unmanageable nature of the old city.
It was seen as backward.
Very much so. The Venizelos government wanted to anchor Thessaloniki firmly to the west. They wanted to modernize it and to integrate it fully into the Greek state.
Because it had just been annexed 5 years prior in 1912, right?
Correct. So to do that, they needed a visionary. They needed someone who could impose order on this absolute destruction.
And by a sheer stroke of historical serendipity, one of the most qualified urban planners on the planet was already standing right there in the city wearing a military uniform.
Enter Ernest Hébrard.
Let's really look at who this guy was, because his background is fascinating.
He was born in Paris in 1875. And he isn't just an architect. He is the absolute elite of European architectural academia.
He studied at the prestigious École des Beaux-Arts in Paris.
And in 1904, he won the Grand Prix de Rome.
Which is essentially like the Nobel Prize for architecture at the time, right?
It was the highest honor you could get. And his winning project was an exhaustive study and theoretical reconstruction of Diocletian's palace in Italy.
Okay, so that background feels really essential to understanding what happens next.
Oh, it's the key to everything. By studying Diocletian's palace, Hébrard spent his formative years analyzing monumental imperial Roman scale.
He understood how massive planned civic structures dictate the flow of a population.
Exactly. He was steeped in French Beaux-Arts rationalism. That school of thought prized symmetry, grand perspectives, and strict geometric order above all else.
But wait, in 1917, he's not in Greece as some high society architect.
No, he's serving as a soldier and archaeologist with the French Army of the East.
So he is spending his days mapping the Roman monuments of Thessaloniki, like the Rotunda and the Arch of Galerius.
And then the Venizelos government, specifically the Minister of Transport, Alexandros Papnastasiou, basically taps him on the shoulder.
Hey, we need you to design the new Thessaloniki. Yeah. That's wild. That's like a battlefield medic being asked to redesign a hospital system.
It is. But they made him the head of an international planning committee.
And Hébrard approaches the ashes of Thessaloniki exactly how you would expect a Grand Prix de Rome winner to approach it.
He looks at the memory of that old organic labyrinth and decides it must be cured through rational geometry.
His blueprints are just breathtaking in their ambition. He institutes strict hierarchical zoning. He separates industrial areas from residential and commercial zones.
He mandates wider streets specifically designed to let light and air penetrate the dense city blocks. He was actively trying to address the severe public hygiene issues of the past.
And the absolute crown jewel of this rationalist vision is what we now know as the Aristotle axis.
It's iconic.
He designs this massive monumental corridor, this grand boulevard that cuts straight through the heart of the city and opens up dramatically into a massive square right on the seafront.
But it's not just a big road, it is a piece of urban dramaturgy.
Yeah, because he calculates the angles so that if you stand at the highest point of this axis, up in the upper city, your eye is drawn perfectly down the boulevard across the waters of the Thermaic Gulf to rest directly on the peaks of Mount Olympus.
It is a brilliant, highly intentional visual connection between the modern city and the mythological heart of Greece.
It was a huge statement of power and order.
He also mandated a specific architectural style for the buildings lining this new grand axis. He called for a Neo-Byzantine style.
What did that look like?
It was characterized by uniform arcades, arches, and specific color palettes. He wanted to create a cohesive civic center that felt as grand and unified as the Piazzetta in Venice.
That's ambitious. But it is important to note that he wasn't a total bulldozer about the history, right?
Yeah, because he was an archaeologist first and foremost. He fiercely protected the surviving Byzantine and Ottoman monuments.
Right. He specifically designed small squares and widened streets around them so they could breathe.
He wanted them to act as focal points, creating a dialogue between the city's ancient multicultural past and its highly engineered future.
So on paper, looking at the blueprints, it is an undeniable masterpiece. It is beautiful, it is sanitary, it is grand.
On paper, yes.
But here's where we have to stop looking at the blueprints and start looking at the reality on the ground.
Because drawing a wide, beautiful 100-meter boulevard across a map is incredibly easy.
But underneath that beautiful line on the map were the property deeds of thousands of families.
Exactly. Which brings us to the social earthquake.
Right. Because the fire of 1917 cleared the physical buildings, but Ernest Hébrard's urban plan cleared the actual people.
This is undoubtedly the darkest, most complicated legacy of the entire modernization effort. You simply cannot impose a grand geometric grid on a city without destroying the organic property lines that existed before.
So how did they do it? To make Hébrard's plan a reality, the government realized they couldn't just tell people, okay, build your house back exactly where it was.
Because if they did that, the narrow, winding streets would just come right back. The plan would be ruined.
So they passed a radical piece of legislation, Law 1394 in 1918. Let's break down exactly how this law functioned, because it is the mechanical engine of displacement.
Essentially, the government completely expropriated all the land in the fire-stricken zone.
They just seized the center of the city.
They did, and to compensate the owners, they created what was called a real estate group, or kitimatiki omada in Greek. If you owned property before the fire, you did not get your specific physical plot of land back.
It's gone.
It's gone. Instead, government assessors would value what your property had been worth before the fire, and you were issued financial shares in this massive municipal real estate group equivalent to that value.
Now, the government's intention here was, arguably, progressive, based on the urban reform theories of the 1910s.
Right. They believed that by pooling the land, they could prevent rampant land speculation and collectively raise the value of the entire city.
So the idea is, once the new grid was drawn, you could use your shares to purchase one of the new geometrically perfect plots.
That was the theory. But the math of this is brutal when you apply it to the working class.
Let's do a thought experiment. Put yourself in the shoes of a local Jewish tailor. You own a small, traditional wooden shop in the center of the old labyrinth.
Okay.
Your property burns down. The government hands you a piece of paper saying you own, let's say, 50 shares in the real estate group.
Yeah.
But now, Hébrard's new city plan dictates that the area where your old neighborhood used to be is now designated as a grand boulevard.
And the new architectural codes state that any building constructed on this boulevard must be a massive, multi-story apartment block.
Built with expensive, modern, reinforced concrete.
Featuring those specific Neo-Byzantine arcades we talked about.
Exactly. So you, the tailor, have your 50 shares. But the new plot requires 500 shares just to purchase the land.
Let alone the immense capital required to actually pour reinforced concrete and hire architects to meet those strict aesthetic codes.
So you are completely priced out of your own neighborhood. It's like hitting factory reset on a computer, but when it reboots, all your old files are locked behind a paywall.
That's a perfect analogy. So what is your only option as the tailor?
You have to sell your shares.
You have to sell them for whatever cash you can get.
And who is buying those shares?
The wealthy. The new rising bourgeoisie class. They are the only ones who have the capital to pool those shares together, buy the massive new geometric plots, and build these grand apartment buildings.
This legal mechanism fundamentally introduced the concept of horizontal ownership to the city.
Right, the idea of a multi-story apartment building where different families own different floors.
And while it completely modernized the housing stock of Thessaloniki, the practical, undeniable outcome was engineered gentrification on a massive scale.
The poor populations, and particularly that large Jewish community that had lived tightly packed in the commercial center for centuries, were effectively evicted by bureaucracy.
They were pushed out to the fringes of the city, to these new peripheral settlements.
The multi-ethnic, mixed-class soul of the historic center was shattered, and it was replaced by a sanitized, wealthy, European-style center.
It is the ultimate double-edged sword of urban planning. He gave the city light, air, and monumentality, but he extracted the people who gave the city its original heartbeat.
It's a tragic trade-off.
Which brings us to the supreme, almost unbelievable irony of how this city chose to remember the man who orchestrated this massive rationalist transformation.
This is where the story gets really bizarre.
You would assume that Ernest Hébrard, the man who brought order to the chaos, would have the grandest avenue in the city named after him.
A sweeping boulevard that stretches to the sea.
Exactly. You'd expect statues, massive street signs. But the reality of Ernest Hébrard Street is one of the funniest and most revealing cartographic mistakes in modern urban history.
The street named after the great rational planner is located in the Analadadig district.
But calling it a street is a very generous interpretation of reality.
It is a blind, 50-meter dead-end alleyway.
And the deeper you dig into the map archives, the more absurd it gets.
Yeah.
Let me get this straight. The man whose entire legacy is based on rational planning gets honored with an alley.
Well, if you look at the official 1928 city plan, a plan ironically signed by Ioannis Metaxas, the Minister of Transport at the time, the area where this street supposedly exists is depicted as a solid, unified building block.
There's no street there.
There is no line drawn for a street. There is no public thoroughfare. It is just private property.
So how does a street magically appear on the map?
We have to jump forward to an architectural permit filed in 1955.
Okay, 1955.
A private owner decides to build on this block. The permit shows the construction of two identical parallel buildings.
Right.
And the architectural plan was to connect these two buildings with a covered commercial arcade, essentially a modern version of a traditional con or gallery.
Oh, like a roofed passage where shoppers could walk through between the structures.
Exactly. The permit clearly shows a roof connecting the two buildings. But as often happens in the chaotic reality of construction, the roof was never built.
The money ran out or plans changed.
Right. The two buildings went up, but the connecting gallery was abandoned.
So what remained was simply the unbuilt, uncovered space between two privately owned walls.
Yes. And in Greek building code, this is simply an ekalyptos, an uncovered private plot.
It is essentially an empty, elongated private courtyard. It has zero legal standing as a public road.
None at all. And it sits like that for decades, an empty gap, until 1977.
1977. The Municipal Council of Thessaloniki is having a meeting.
And they decide, you know what, it's a shame we don't have a street honoring Ernest Hébrard. We should fix that.
They look at a map, they see this 50-meter gap between two buildings in Analadadik, and they completely misinterpret the zoning.
They assume it's a small public road.
And they pass an official municipal decree naming this private, unbuilt courtyard Ernest Hébrard Street.
I mean, the philosophical irony is just staggering.
That's like honoring Beethoven by naming a silent room after him.
It really is. You have an architect whose entire life's work was about imposing strict, legally binding, geometric rationality onto a city, and the city honors him with a street that isn't a street, wasn't planned, defies the grid, and legally belongs to a random private landlord.
It perfectly encapsulates the tension between the planner and the city.
The planner draws rigid lines, but the city is a living organism. It creates accidents.
Buildings fail to connect. Courtyards become shortcuts.
Exactly. And the top-down vision is constantly eroded by bottom-up reality. The organic city always gets the last laugh.
But the beautiful thing about an organic city is that the citizens don't care about the legal zoning on a piece of paper from 1955.
If there is a space, they will use it.
And the people of Thessaloniki absolutely embraced this weird phantom alleyway. Which brings us to an incredible night, June 5th, 2010.
This was a brilliant moment of urban reclamation.
Tell us about it.
The local magazine Parallaxi was celebrating its 20th anniversary as part of a larger civic initiative called Thessaloniki Allios, which translates to Thessaloniki otherwise. They partnered with a visionary lighting design collective called Before Light.
Their goal was to take this dark, ignored fake street and transform it.
They put out a call to the citizens of the city, asking them to donate old, unused domestic lamps.
And the response was incredible, right?
People brought in old living room lamps, dining room chandeliers, quirky bedside lamps with fabric shades.
The design team took all these distinctly private, domestic objects and strung them up on a wire grid over the top of Hébrard Street.
It created this glowing, eclectic, illuminated canopy over the dark alley.
I've seen the archival photos of that night. They are absolutely stunning.
It completely blurred the line between private living room and public street. They turned the alley into an outdoor urban lounge.
People flooded the space. There were dancers in vintage clothes, traditional music echoing off the walls.
For that night, and the years that followed while the installation remained up, the Phantom Street became a magical communal space.
It was a profound statement that a city belongs to the people who actively use and love its spaces, regardless of what the municipal blueprints say.
It was a beautiful illusion, but it was ultimately an illusion.
Yeah. And in February 2016, the legal reality of that 1955 building permit came crashing down on the neighborhood.
The citizens woke up one morning to find that the magical public space was gone.
The private owners of the two twin buildings had installed heavy, bright yellow barriers at both ends of the alley.
Just like that, with the turning of a padlock, the vibrant pedestrian thoroughfare where people had danced under a canopy of lamps was converted into a private parking lot.
Imagine walking down your favorite quirky alley in your city, a place you've danced in, only to find it walled off one morning for a few sedans. You can imagine the shock and outrage from the community.
People were asking, how could the municipality allow a named street to be walled off?
Right. But when the city lawyers actually looked at the paperwork, they realized they were completely powerless.
Because the street had never been officially expropriated by the state, and because it was never drawn into the official grid as public land, it remained technically and legally the uncovered private plot of those buildings.
The owners were exercising their absolute legal right to fence off their courtyard.
The municipality had named a space they literally didn't own.
It is a brutal microcosm of the modern urban struggle. Think about your own city. Think about the quirky alleys, the empty lots where kids play, the spaces that hold public memory. We feel a sense of ownership over them because we live in them.
But the rigid lines of property deeds don't care about public memory.
Exactly. And the erection of those yellow barriers in 2016 wasn't just an isolated incident about parking. It was a massive warning sign.
It was the canary in the coal mine for a new, invisible fire that is currently sweeping through that exact same neighborhood.
Because today, the entire district around Valaoritou, Venizelos, and Valaoritou is experiencing a massive wave of displacement.
And when you look closely at the mechanics of it, it mirrors the social earthquake of Hébrard's 1917 plan in a deeply unsettling way.
To understand what's happening now, we have to look back at the Greek economic crisis that started around 2010.
That crisis devastated the specific commercial district. The traditional craft workshops, the small textile industries, the local artisans, they were wiped out.
They closed their doors, and these large industrial buildings were left completely abandoned. Rents hit rock bottom.
And whenever you have cheap, abandoned urban space, a very specific demographic moves in.
The artists.
The artists. During the depth of the crisis, hundreds of local musicians realized they could rent these massive former industrial spaces for almost nothing.
They moved into buildings that were never really designed for human habitation.
They used pure DIY ingenuity to make them work.
Yeah, I read they nailed egg cartons to the walls for soundproofing. They brought in cheap foam.
It became an incredible grassroots cultural incubator. You'd have a dozen different bands sharing the same floor.
One guy brings a drum kit, another wires up a PA system.
It was a thriving, loud, collaborative, artistic community breathing life back into a dead commercial zone.
But then the global economy shifts, the crisis eases, and the massive wave of short-term rentals, driven primarily by Airbnb, hits Thessaloniki.
And this is where the modern displacement begins. Massive real estate investment funds realize the immense potential of the city's tourism market.
They look at these old, dilapidated industrial buildings in Valaoritou, and they don't see craft workshops or music studios.
They see boutique, short-term tourist apartments.
Because they have massive capital backing, they can afford to buy up entire blocks, gut the buildings, and perform high-end renovations.
And the immediate, undeniable casualty is that local artistic community. The musicians are being evicted en masse as the buildings are sold out from under them.
But what's even more absurd is what happens to the musicians who manage to hang on in the adjacent buildings. They're suddenly facing constant police harassment and noise complaints.
The irony is staggering. You have tourists who are staying in short-term rentals that were historically zoned as noisy textile factories.
Buildings that originally didn't even have indoor plumbing.
Right, and these tourists are calling the police to complain that the local musicians are playing their instruments too loudly.
The local creative class, the people who actually built the cultural cachet of the neighborhood that the tourists are coming to experience, is being actively criminalized for existing in their own space. It's like a slow-motion, invisible fire. It's not burning down buildings this time, but it's displacing the local culture just as effectively.
It reached a boiling point recently. The musicians organized a massive street concert to protest the evictions and the loss of cultural space.
And where did they hold this protest?
Exactly on the blocked-off, tiny, fake Ernest Hébrard Street.
It is the perfect stage for that protest.
Because if you synthesize what happened in 1917 with what is happening in the 2020s, the parallel is exact.
Ernest Hébrard drew a rational blueprint that inadvertently pushed out the multicultural working class to make way for a wealthy bourgeoisie.
And today, algorithms and real estate funds are drawing a new financial blueprint, pushing out the local creative class to make way for transient, short-term tourists.
In both 1918 and today, the physical architecture of the city is upgraded. The buildings look nicer.
But the lived-in, organic, chaotic culture is extracted. The city is being actively hollowed out to serve as a sterilized product for consumption.
A sterilized product. You preserve the shell, but you kill the organism.
That's exactly what's happening.
But amidst all this heavy, cyclical displacement, there is actually a glimmer of hope for Ernest Hébrard's legacy.
Yes, there is some good news.
Because the municipality finally realized that having the most important architect in your city's history remembered by a private parking lot behind yellow barriers is a profound civic embarrassment.
It absolutely is. And after years of pressure from local advocates, most notably the architect Prodromos Nikiforidis, who was actually the one who originally dug into the archives and exposed the absurdity of the fake alley decades ago, the current municipal administration is finally making a move to honor Hébrard properly.
They are building a real square, a massive new project that is slated for completion in 2025.
It's a huge step.
Let's talk about the geography of this, because the location is a piece of absolute poetic justice. The new Ernest Hébrard Square is being constructed above the Agios Dimitrios Church, right on Cassandra Street.
From an urban planning perspective, Cassandra Street is not just a random location.
No, it represents the absolute pinnacle, the visual climax of Hébrard's original monumental Aristotle axis.
Yes. If you follow the Grand Boulevard all the way up from the sea, past the ancient monuments, through the modern grid, it terminates right there.
By building the square at this specific location, the city is finally, physically, completing the thought that Hébrard started over a century ago.
The design of the new square, which is led by architect Bernard Cuomo and funded by the private dairy company Mevigal, is also highly significant.
What are they doing with the space?
Well, it is transforming what is currently a barren, disorganized patch of dirt into a highly structured green park.
Which is so needed.
It will organize the chaotic outdoor parking, and crucially, it will add a modern playground for children in a densely packed residential area that currently has almost zero recreational space.
So after diving deep into this century-long saga, I have to ask you, by building this square a century later, are we finally giving the architect the respect he deserves? Or is this just a beautiful green Band-Aid on a city that still fundamentally struggles to protect its own public spaces from privatization and gentrification?
I think it functions as both, honestly. The struggles with Airbnb and displacement prove the city is still wrestling with who owns its spaces. But there is a deep, resonant poetry to this new square.
Yeah.
By placing it at the culmination of his grand axis, the city is aligning with his geometric vision. But more importantly, by providing green space, seating, and play areas, things this modern, concrete-heavy city desperately starves for, it is actually fulfilling the original core spirit of his 1917 mission.
Right, because beneath the grandiosity, his primary driving goal was to improve hygiene, let the choked city breathe, and create spaces for public joy.
And this square, finally, does exactly that.
It gives the city room to breathe. And maybe that is the best way to honor a man who tried to cure the chaos.
I agree completely.
It has been a wild, fascinating journey today. From a spark in a basement frying eggplants to the grand blueprints of a visionary French architect. From the bureaucratic comedy of a phantom alleyway to the modern, algorithm-driven struggle over who the city actually belongs to.
It's a story that keeps evolving.
As we wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a completely different way to think about this story. We spent a lot of time talking about lines drawn on physical paper in 1917 and 1928. But think about the map you use every single day. The digital map on your phone, Google Maps, Apple Maps.
The maps that guide our daily lives.
Right. We tend to look at these digital maps as objective, absolute reality. But just like Hébrard's blueprints, they're actually arguments. They are drawn by algorithms that prioritize commercial spaces, that route traffic away from wealthy neighborhoods, that erase informal settlements.
It's a curated reality.
Exactly. The story of Ernest Hébrard's fake street forces us to ask, what are the phantom streets on our digital maps today? What organic human realities are currently being erased by the clean, rational interface on your screen? Because whoever draws the map dictates the reality.
That's a really powerful thought to end on.
And on that note, as a final reminder, this deep dive is part of the podcast Ordomosikitis D2 Storta by Giannis Stefanidis. Keep questioning the lines on your map, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.